let's continue with our first fireside here on the procurement stage. I'm delighted to welcome Lauren Hymen, Vice President Strategy and Transformation Digital Procurement from PepsiCo. A warm welcome for Lauren, please. Right, as you'll see behind me, our topic is driving business value through strategic procurement transformation. But where I'd like to start is a little bit of context first, Lauren, a bit about your role at PepsiCo and what procurement transformation means for what is a global operation. Talk me through it.
Well, first of all, Neil, thank you so much for having me here and making a crack about my very long title at the beginning. But I'm here to explain what that title is. So, as Neil says, I'm Lauren Hymen, and I lead digital procurement for PepsiCo. So, what does that mean? Well, I partner with our procurement function, our leadership, and our chief procurement officer to understand what their objectives are and how we can unlock that from a digital perspective. I'm also researching transformational solutions that we can bring into PepsiCo, pilot, and see how we can make the lives of our procurement teams even better and more efficient. Now, you asked about our global reach and organization, so hopefully most people know that PepsiCo is a huge organization. We have tens of thousands of suppliers, we have a large portfolio of brands and SKUs, and we have wide geographical reach. So that makes digital transformation even more imperative. We need data across the company so that we can collaborate, and it's really critical for our business success.
So tell me a story here, Lauren, about the drivers, the main reasons PepsiCo decided to start the digital procurement transformation. I'm sure there is a beginning and a middle to this story, but talk me through it.
And no end.
Exactly.
So I think there's a couple of drivers that I'll talk about. I'm sure there are many, but the three that come to mind, I think first of all, the macroeconomic environment that we're dealing with, the instability of supply. I mean, this has really changed the lives of any procurement professional, as most of you in the room are. And so we need to do so much more as a procurement organization, and we need to find ways to do that effectively and efficiently. That's where digital comes in. And I think we're lucky because the second factor I'll talk about is the procurement digital landscape has really changed. We now have a plethora of solutions to choose from over the last 5 years, and AI and agentic AI is just exponentially making the opportunities for us in the digital space even more effective. And then lastly, I think it comes down to the role that procurement plays. We've really seen this shift from a tactical organization and function to a truly strategic one. At PepsiCo, our leadership team, we sit at the center of our executive board decision making, and because we have information to data that they need to make these decisions. And so with that shift from the tactical to strategic and the environment that we're in, I think that we need to find ways to free up procurement's time from the truly operational work that we've always had to do so that we can focus on the strategic work. And that's where digital comes in.
Before I get on to sort of alignment with other areas of the business, you mentioned there that the change in technology. There are so many solutions out there, so many different ideas. It's tough for leadership to pick what to go with next, what route to go down. For you personally, how do you go about that particular challenge?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get excited about new technology. I mean, you see things and you want to bring it into the organization. But I think what really sets us out is really understanding what are the problems we're trying to solve. There's a lot of things out there, but how does that help PepsiCo operate more efficiently? I said this before, I'm trying to free up procurement's time, so I need to understand what they're doing day to day, where they're seeing bottlenecks, and then how this technology changes the way they work, as opposed to just being something cool and fun.
Now, I'm sure if I had $1 for every time I've talked about people working in silos on this stage, I'd be a very, very rich man. But how do you go about making sure there's the alignment between the procurement transformation with the wider business goals, finance, sustainability, supply chain? That is not an easy task. How do you go about doing that?
So we've seen a lot of transformation at PepsiCo, and it's not always about operating model, but I do think that helps. So over the last couple of years, we've taken a couple of different functions, our previous IT organization, our strategy organization, and our shared services, and merged that under one umbrella, which as you mentioned when my introduction, is the Strategy and Transformation Office. So now we can identify where we want to go strategically and have the people that are then going to unlock that, deploy those solutions all under one team. So I think that's helped break down a lot of silos. And then within my part of the organization, we stretch across supply chain and ops. So while I lead digital procurement, I have peers in manufacturing, in logistics, in transportation, and so we work together to create the future of an end-to-end digitally enabled supply chain. The last thing I'll say is that now that we have all these teams under one umbrella, I'll give you an example of how it unlocks value. So we have a team that we call our PepsiCo Labs team. They're helpful in basically scouring, around to see what's new in the marketplace and then what we could bring into PepsiCo, agnostic to function. And they look across capabilities. So I'll give you an example that we all know and love in procurement: negotiation, right? But there's lots of different functions within an organization that have to work on this capability. Sales, commercial, but rarely do we come together and figure out how we do this as one. From a technology perspective, there's a lot of opportunity there. So this team has helped identify what's in the marketplace and how can three almost disparate functions come together and use this as one cohesive unit.
Let's talk about impact now, if we can. And I'd love to know some examples of the most important changes and innovations there have been and the results that it's brought from this transformation. What are the examples you'd want to pick out?
Well, this is the part that brings me the most pride. What are we working on? So I'll start with, I always think about digital transformation from almost a lens of like a house and building a foundation. We've been focused on building a solid foundation in which we can iterate on top of. And that comes in two forms for me. One is the people side and one is the data and technology. On the people side, we're really focused on changing the mindset of an organization so people wake up thinking digital. We have a digital procurement community globally across the organization that has this curiosity for knowledge. In fact, if I don't wake up to some new thing that I should be trying every morning, I'm almost disappointed. I think just last week, our team was using AI to turn all of our recent conferences into a podcast, which I listened to on my run this morning. So just using different technology to bring into our daily lives. But that's the people side of it, changing the mindset of how we think about bringing digital into our organization. Then, on the flip side, is the foundation of data and technology. Like I said, there's really awesome technology that we want to use at PepsiCo, but we need to understand how to unlock that value is creating the data foundation in order to bring that technology forward. So we've been focused in a couple of areas. One, trying to understand what we buy and what we pay for it from a spend visibility perspective globally across our organization. Then working on what should we pay for those things, building robust should-cost models that we can all use. And then who are the suppliers that we want to partner with? So really understanding how our suppliers perform with true supplier performance metrics with real-time data. And then lastly, we're really focused especially on the indirect procurement side. There's so much data out there, but it's hard to understand the behavior of our organization. And so that's what we're spending a lot of time building that foundation of data that we can then iterate on top of.
I love the fact you started with people there. I do a lot of these events, and it's something that's really, really coming to the fore now about making sure the people are the correct tools, to use the correct tools. How much time do you personally put into that to make sure that the people are set up for the future of the digital procurement landscape?
Yeah, I think most people that know me would say that I probably over-index on the people side of it. But at the end of the day, a tool is just a tool. I can bring the coolest technology to the organization, but if I don't understand the people that are using it, what their needs are, where they are in this journey, we'll never move forward. And I think in a lot of different conversations that we have about AI in the future, there's a lot of things that will change. But what won't change is that people are at the center of it all. And so in order to really make truly transformational change at any organization and with any technology, you really got to start with the people.
Absolutely, and I know I could do an entire session with software companies, vendors who have put in new tools with different organizations, and they go around and find people are still using a spreadsheet and emailing each other rather than actually using said tool. That's something I should do at some point.
Oh, so you know us at Pepsi.
That's not what I was suggesting. I wouldn't dream of it. As you mentioned technology, let's move on to that if we can. tools like data, automation, AI. How few is it making procurement more efficient and more valuable at PepsiCo?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in democratizing data, making it available to the masses with the right level of information. I was at a conference last year, and the chief procurement officer, she referred to her role actually as a chief insights officer. And I loved that, because I think it's very true. I mean, if you think about it, procurement's at the center of everything. They touch every function in an organization. And then we have massive amounts of data from a supplier perspective, the external landscape. I mean, there's really no other function that truly achieves what we do. So we have all of this information at our fingertips. So now the question is, how do we get that out to the masses for them to make better decision making? One example that we're working on now, and I mentioned on the indirect procurement side, is we're trying to change behavior. I mean, how many of us out there have written procurement policies to try to control the way people spend money? Well, now we're trying to get the information in their hands. How much are they spending in travel and entertainment? How much are they spending on contractors, consultants? And then adding some AI technology on top, which says, well, what should you be spending? And how does this compare to your peers? And putting the decision, the ownership, in the business. This is the way that we're using data to just change holistically the way that our company operates.
If we can just stay with the question of data, and I know it's a continuous problem for procurement operations of making sure that data is consistent, it's clean, whether it's coming from smaller suppliers, for example. What approach do you have to making sure the data you have is fit for purpose for all the technology that's being used?
Well, I think that question goes back to what we're doing with our foundation. Instead of spending time just getting all the new technology out there and bringing it into Pepsi, we're very selective right now, because we really need to work on that foundation, making sure that we have all of the data in one place. And our big opportunity this year that we've spent time on is building that enterprise data foundation. So now we can quickly move to the new technologies, because we have this extensive data foundation to be able to pull and iterate on top of.
Where I'd like to go next is change management here, because of all the new technology we've been talking about here, the speed of change is extraordinary. How do you manage that change and build new skills within the team so you make sure that transformation lasts, that it's properly implemented? It's a slightly impossible question, but how do you go about doing it?
Well, you mentioned my focus on people, and I'm very thoughtful about my words. So when you asked me what I did to start, I started this by saying I partner with my chief procurement officer and our procurement leadership team, because at the end of the day, this isn't a separate siloed transformation that then I make a change management plan to implement with them. I sit in their meetings. I sit in their sector reviews. Every day, I'm with procurement sitting side by side to understand their problems to solve and how we do it. So this isn't a one-off plan, but it's a constant evolving change of, this is your problem, here's how digitally we can solve it. So I think that's one element of the change journey that's really unlocked a lot of value for us. And it's not just me at a leadership level. There's members of my team that sit within the business, within their reviews every day, and are a part of that agenda. And I think our leadership team does a good job of not having digital as a sidebar, but just truly injects this in the way that we talk about business reviews and everything that we do. I think the other thing that I'll highlight is, you'd asked about making the change stick. And I think you can't just think of digital as tools and just technology. We really have to pair that with a capability agenda. So at PepsiCo, we have a procurement excellence team that's driving our agenda of where we're building capabilities. And I'll give you an example of how we partner from a digital perspective. So our procurement excellence team is working on a risk and resilience framework. I mean, who isn't having issues from a supply perspective? But the way we've handled it in the past has always been reactionary. We look at it and say, okay, there's an outage, what's affected, how do we move supply around? Now, our procurement excellence team is working on a predictive model so that we can anticipate these risks, and we're now building that digitally with one of our partners.
One place we haven't touched on fully is AI and your approach to using AI at the moment. What are your thoughts? I know when I'm often in this situation, there is a degree of confusion from the room. There is so much potential in the technology. How do you implement it to make sure it is actually delivering business value rather than just another new toy? What's your personal approach?
Yeah, I think it's playing. Play with what's out there, test it out and see what works. We have a couple of pockets of areas that we're really playing with AI. Risk and resilience is one of them. Spend analytics is another. Taking large amounts of data, being able to interpret, iterate on it. Those are the areas that we're playing with right now. So I think part of this is it's new and people aren't sure where to even start. So the way that we've approached it is start in small pockets with different pilots, and then not everything's going to come to fruition, and that's okay, right? I think about when we talk about a new product development funnel, you expect that things are going to fall out, but when it comes to the other side of the business, we never allow people to fail. And I think this is where actually testing things out, seeing what works for your business, and whether the organization is ready for it is part of the journey.
It's that spirit of experimentation, which is key. I do want to get on to the biggest challenges and some of the lessons you've learned through that transformation, but I appreciate I'm also hogging all the questions again. So I will turn to the room to see if there's anyone who does have a question for Lauren, or any hands going up. Oh, we do. This is where I get to go for a walk. This is where I get my steps up during the day.
Hi, Lauren. I'm Rochelle. I'm from CME Group. You spoke about an enterprise data foundation, and at CME we use a number of different tools. How did, and this is a very big question, but do you have any suggestions as to how we ingest all that data from those different tools and essentially build one foundation where we can access all that data?
Yeah. So I can just talk about what's worked for Pepsi, and every organization is different, but I think that we've tried and failed a couple of times in different tools without starting with that foundation first, or using other solutions to build that foundation. So for us, we've actually built that in-house. So we've started with identifying what are all the data elements that we're going to need for the solutions that we're using in our organization, and then we've actually built that enterprise data foundation ourselves with building up our data science team internally. So that's how we've handled it, because I think we're a pretty unique organization from a procurement perspective. We have co-manufacturing, we have independent bottlers, we just have such a vast amount of data coming in. We really need to own that and create those tools into one space.
So you had a specialized team for that?
Yes, we have an enterprise data foundation team, and then within each function that brings in data, we have procurement professionals that understand the procurement data elements that need to be pulled to bring it in.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Next question over here.
Hi, Lauren. Matteo from Kurenagel. It's really interesting, the predictive model that you guys are building right now. China tariffs, COVID. I really want to understand a little bit more, if you can talk a little bit more about this. This is really interesting. Thank you.
Sorry, can you say that question again?
The model that you're developing right now for predicting things instead of like being reactive.
On the supplier risk resilience. So it's a predictive model that essentially allows us to look at previous past events and how it's like a regression model, how it's affected supply risk and those outages, and then use that as almost a regression model in the future to predict basically where we can potentially see outages in the future and what we should do from a risk and resilience perspective in terms of moving supply to meet those potential outages in the future.
Thank you. We've got 2 more questions we'll quickly get through.
Hello, Lauren. This is Manish. I'm from PwC. Very curious to understand a little bit more about the change journey, right? You talked about Pepsi having a huge network from a co-man and the bottler standpoint. So how were they involved in this journey? Were you able to bring them right from the day one? Did you have some early adopters? So maybe you could shed some light on that. That would be very helpful.
Yeah. So we certainly have our digital friendlies, we call them our digital procurement squad, that have embraced technology, and they're interested, innovative, and willing to kind of speak up to that. I think a couple of things I'll highlight that have been successful. First is having the leadership team on board. I mean, it's not always top down that makes things work, but I think having that alignment and then and the expectation from a leadership organization that you're going to talk with data, we're going to use these tools. It's consistent in every meeting and in every discussion we have, so I think that's really crucial. Then pairing that with people within the organization that are passionate, that are interested, that are going to take it through to the next level, I think you get that balance of both leadership and peer set. I think that's helped drive it. And then the last one I'll just say is they shouldn't be separate. Right? So when we talk about these digital friendlies, how do you bring them back into the organization to say, okay, this is how I'm using the technology, and have them talk to their peer set? I think those are kind of the 3 pillars that we've been building our change journey on.
Thank you. And one last question here.
Thank you so much for being here, Lauren. I appreciate your insights. Quick question, how has Pepsi used digitalization to improve supplier traceability, and how does this aid in achieving Scope 3 sustainability initiatives? And do you see a large overlap here, or how do you see them interact?
Yeah. So I think the first thing about tracing Scope 3 and understanding is, first of all, it's the same thing we've been talking about holistically, is it's massive amounts of data that you need from your supply base to understand what's going on in the sustainability world and how you're going to achieve those goals. So similar to what I've described in the Enterprise Data Foundation and building that, this is just another input. It's not specific to sustainability, right? But it's understanding, and I could do this for every element of data that we have, cost, sustainability, supplier performance metrics, et cetera. It's about identifying what are the key data elements that you want to have, and then finding a plan to either partner with your suppliers, if this is where you need it from a Scope 3 emissions perspective, or wherever that is, to make a sustainable model to automate that information coming in so that you can action upon it. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. One last one for me, and this will round us up nicely in the last couple of minutes. Any lessons that you've learned from this transformation journey? What were the main ones that spring to mind?
Yeah. I think there's three that I was thinking about, and as we were talking, I think we've covered all of them, but maybe it's just a good way to finish out the discussion. So the first one is know the problem you're trying to solve and don't get distracted by innovative technology. Really stay true to what you're trying to do. And even if you're playing, even if you're iterating, just remember at the end of the day what problem you're trying to solve. I think that's one. I think the second, and I'm hearing it throughout the room, but I'll iterate it, is data. Data, data, data. You need to have the right foundation to do any of the things that we're talking about. And I'll take it one step further and say, you really need to ask yourself when you're bringing in a new technology, what is the dependency? What information do you need in order to make that technology work? I'm not gonna lie, we've had a couple of starts and stops with some very cool technology that required dependencies that we didn't realize, and we had to backtrack and make sure that we had those dependencies in order to be successful. And then the last one's the one we keep talking about, which is iterate and play, fail often and frequently. I've heard this said before, but I'll add my own personal take on it, and it actually is referencing something Kathy said during the earlier discussion, Women in Procurement, which is trust. You can have the luxury of failing if you've built a strong base of trust with your stakeholders, with your partners. I started my career on the consulting side, and not to insult my consulting friends and partners in the room, but one of the things I didn't have the fortune of doing is failing, because I was paid for an engagement that had to be successful. So my first transformation after leaving the consulting world was a huge failure, because I wasn't used to this process of iterating, going back, and continuous improvement. So that's what I would leave us all with, is build that trust with wherever you're doing, that they know that when you fail, you are going to come back and you are going to fix it.
Thank you very much, Lauren. We've covered a huge amount in sort of 20, 25 minutes. Really enjoyed your company. Up next on this stage, we have our joint keynote with Zip and Northwestern Mutual, so just mark in your card for that. But for now, everyone, a warm thanks to Lauren Hymen from PepsiCo. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.